I was finishing up the last few months of my PA training in the spring of 2000. Becoming a physician assistant, or PA, had been a long-term dream of mine, and I put in years of hard work and sacrifice to get there. Graduating from PA school while also becoming a mother was a far better gift than I could have envisioned for myself. I'd daydream about all the things we had to look forward to while finishing up my clinical rotations and prepping for my board examinations. In January 2000, my husband and I relocated from New York to Florida, and in February, I had my 20-week ultrasound. While running the probe over my belly, the doctor showed us our baby's skull and femur while gathering measurements. "The infant is exactly where it should be developmentally," he said, smiling. We received a glimpse of our baby's foot as he continued to move the probe. My spouse pointed out one of the toes. "That is, without a doubt, your child." Our baby's second toe, like my husband's, was crooked. When the doctor's demeanor changed, we were giggling. "Let me show you something." He demonstrated how there was a buildup of fluid inside our baby's kidney by positioning the probe to observe it. It wasn't draining properly for some reason. He couldn't say for sure, but it could have been anything from a benign organ abnormality to a potentially fatal hereditary condition. I wish I had more to tell you. This occurred on a Friday. When developing a differential diagnosis in the practice of medicine, all possible causes of a person's ailment must be considered until they're ruled out. The phrase, "think horses, not zebras," reminds us that the most prevalent cause is most certainly the cause. I investigated the differential diagnosis of hydronephrosis, or excess fluid in the kidney, and tried to be optimistic about its root cause as we waited for our OB appointment on Monday, telling myself it was something easy that she would grow out of. Even when I attempted to think about horses, my mind kept returning to zebras. While my husband and I were concerned, my mother-in-law stated that she had a kidney disease when she was younger and had corrective surgery as an adult. We determined that our operation for a ureter-pelvic junction, or UPJ, stricture, or narrowing of the tube draining urine from the kidney to the bladder. Everyone breathed a sense of relief with this newfound understanding. Our baby's condition must be inherited. It corresponded to what the ultrasound revealed and was repairable. My thoughts instantly returned to horses, where they remained for the rest of that long, emotional weekend. My husband and I met with my OB, obstetrician, on Monday morning, who concurred that our baby's problem was most likely related to a congenital abnormality of the ureter, and we decided not to pursue any further tests. We avoided the first bullet. My OB mentioned the possibility of an early delivery 4 months later, in the final month of my pregnancy. I may be induced at 35 weeks, and our baby's kidney health could be evaluated sooner rather than later by a pediatric urologist. It wasn't necessary for her to be delivered early, but it was a possibility. While I tried not to be, I was concerned that if I didn't agree to this plan, I might endanger my baby's long-term health while I still hesitated to respond. To deliver her early, I'd have to be induced into labor, and I knew the chances of a C-section were higher with induction. I desperately wanted to have the experience of childbirth, but I couldn't. I decided to go ahead with the induction because 1 week may potentially make a difference. I was admitted to the hospital's labor and delivery floor on the evening of July 16, 2000, to begin the process. I was a carrier of the bacteria group B streptococcus, which put my daughter at risk of infection when she passed through the birth canal. Before the induction could begin, I needed to be given antibiotics. The penicillin had only been going through the IV for a few minutes when I felt a peculiar sensation in my chest. My heart seemed to be pounding and pumping unevenly. I immediately informed the nurse of the situation and she stopped the IV. The sensation in my chest vanished seconds later. Another antibiotic was required, and while the nurse drained the IV to force through the drug still in it, the feeling in my chest returned temporarily. The only explanation was that it had to be an allergic reaction. This startled me because, as far as I knew, I wasn't allergic to anything, but it's possible that I developed an allergy during my pregnancy. Another antibiotic was picked and administered, and the weird feeling did not reoccur. Pitocin, the medication that would tell my uterus to start contracting, was started as my husband, mother, and I settled into the hospital room for a long evening. Although I have no recollection of the night, I was informed it was relatively unremarkable. That was alright, since what happened the next morning would more than compensate. My contractions were powerful but sporadic the next morning. I had barely dilated 3 centimeters by 8 o'clock. To hasten my labor, the nurse midwife ruptured the amniotic fluid sac. It had already been 13 hours, and I was making no headway. Prolonged labor in a Group B strep carrier raised the probability of infection in the newborn with each passing hour, even with antibiotic therapy. Despite my best efforts to avoid the concept, I knew a C-section was in my immediate future. Pitocin causes abnormally intense contractions, and despite having progressed just 3 centimeters, I was in excruciating discomfort. I lay there, watching the monitor next to the bed after this was set. I knew what to watch for on the screen, and I observed that my baby's heart rate would periodically drop into the 60s when I was having contractions. This was alarmingly low, and I was expecting the midwife to enter the room to break the news. She was there in less than a minute, telling me what needed to be done. Although I knew a cesarean was most likely, I still experienced a brief but intense emotional opposition to it, similar to how I'd rejected the idea of having our baby early. Between now until the surgery, my baby's heart rate would need to be constantly and closely monitored. Thus, an internal monitor would have to be implanted in the scalp. I'd put them in front of myself, but I shuddered at the notion of something being screwed into my own child's head. As these ideas raced through my head, I felt the same fluttering in my chest that I'd felt the night before, only this time it was much worse. I'm having trouble breathing. I went from being a bit short of breath to gasping for oxygen as soon as the words left my lips. A big bustle erupted in the room, and I was hauled onto my left side to allow my heart to pump blood into my unborn kid more easily. Someone put an oxygen mask over my face. My husband and mother were promptly relocated to another room down the hall. I couldn't get enough air and had to push more and harder just to breathe. I was wheeled out of the room and down an open hallway in a couple of seconds. The noise that had surrounded me faded away as I got closer to the operation room suite. As I faded away, the last thing I remembered was the sound I made, a desperate attempt to breathe. My heart stopped beating at 9:18 a.m. There's no such thing as the moment of death. The time when there's no signs of life and our awareness leaves our body is more of a continuum. From the position of awareness, some time had gone between being in the corridor and a view from above. I'm not sure what occurred to my consciousness at this time. Perhaps my energy condensed into a singularity before erupting in a cloud of microscopic black-gray particulate stuff. Perhaps it slowly spilled from the bounds of my solid being, quickly gathering into a loose conglomerate of static-like substance that was now floating above my body. The distance between my conscious self and my body below seemed to have widened, as if space-time had elongated, and my now practically immaterial self was both near and far from my material body. There was no sound, pain, or terror. I could still see and took a look around the room. The ceiling had taken on a fluid transparency, with some flowing, solid characteristics remaining. I saw someone lying on a bed. Was it a human? I remember asking myself this question because I wasn't sure what people were, but seemed to recognize them. The scene unfolding below me no longer physically included Krista, since she was now beyond the transparent ceiling. I didn't identify with the body or the individuals in the room as I lingered above. Instead, I was a detached observer, albeit I was still Krista within the fine static of my consciousness. I had kept my worldly identity and felt more alive than ever before. There were several individuals now surrounding me. On the left, there was a person dressed in blue. At first, I spotted him bending over my body near my abdomen. He then rose up quickly and delivered a bundle to someone on my right shoulder. They took this bundle and swiftly turned their backs on me so I couldn't look, although I desperately wanted to. Someone was close to my head, placing something on my chest. Another person in blue entered the room and paused there, as if observing what was going on, before moving to my right side and joining in on the frenzy. What exactly is going on down there? I was obliged to remain. What was included in the bundle? What was going on with the individual on the bed? As I continued to observe, I felt increasingly hooked to what I was seeing. Suddenly, an unseen force began to tug me to the left. I fought it for a split second, but it was far stronger than my wish to stay. It wanted me, and I knew why it wanted me more than my desire to stay in this location. With this insight, I took the purposeful decision to let go. I was moving at breakneck speed through what I can only characterize as a loosely constricted zone of static and fluid-like matter the moment I made my decision. I was both endlessly big and indefinitely little. It felt like I was about to burst wide open or collapse in on me at any moment. There was no distinction between my consciousness and its walls, which were made of this fluid, static-like continuum of energy. I grew intertwined with this energy as I sped forward, and the more I went, the more I felt permeated with this indefinable, irrefutable, unlimited love. This love and I were completely absorbed in each other. There was no point of separation. I was it, and it was I. Oh, such joy. I felt no pain, anxiety, or fear. The only emotions felt were love and a serene satisfaction. I wished for nothing since there was nothing to wish for. With the exception of one, I was simultaneously given answers to all of the questions I'd ever had throughout my earthly life within this place. There would be one inquiry that I'd not yet received an answer to. At this moment, I turned to the right, toward a thick, foggy, dense, whitish-gray environment. I could see dark, ill-defined individuals as I rushed up to it. They were crowded close together on the opposite side of the door. They possessed a human-like form, but could only be seen in shadows. I recognized one of the figures in the foreground as a young boy. He was the first to appear, and he resembled a gloomy little Tom Sawyer, complete with a wide-brimmed hat and overalls. He wanted to be in the front and for me to return him to the physical realm. The others gathered around him wanted him to be there as well. They felt my want to assist and were using him to entice me. When I entered this dimension, I felt uneasy. It didn't feel as lovely as the area I had just left. I could have fled, but I desperately wanted to help the little guy. As I stepped farther into the area, the others took advantage of my willingness to help and attacked me all at once. They were heartbroken and desperate to escape. I wanted to save them all at first, but I knew it would be way too difficult for me. Overwhelmed, I desired to escape the area, and the moment the wish came to me, I moved away from the dark gray forms, away from the small kid, and didn't look back. Through my own intention, I altered my experience and was once again intermixed with the area of limitless, divine love, although only for a brief moment. I once again passed through a type of gate, or pathway, where I emerged into what I call my Eden. I carried this love through the gate with pure, conscious awareness of it, and with everything I saw around me. I felt an instantaneous immersion in all I observed around me after passing through this gate. I became one with the bright yellow flowers strewn across the ground in front of me. I was one with the glistening cascade pouring down massive boulders into a pristine crystal lake. I was one with the distant green hills and the calm blue sky above them. I was one with the deep, dark evergreens that framed the flower field on my right. What a pleasure it was to be here. Every part of the environment seemed to me to be a distinct manifestation of the divine selected for, and by me. The dense woodland was set against a beautiful backdrop of vivid yellow flowers and a tumbling waterfall. Intuitively, I understood what lay within these trees was neither good nor bad, and that I, like everything else in my beautiful Eden, was a part of it. I had the option of going into this dark place, but I had a feeling I already knew what I would encounter there. Instead, I decided to remain where I was. I didn't need or want to experience anything other than beauty, but the forest was beautiful in its own right. Then, from the love within and around me, it was communicated to me that I had one of three options. The first step was to proceed into the woods, but I'd already rejected that. The second option was to travel beyond my current reality. And the third was to return to my body and resume the life I had abandoned. If I selected this, however, I was to share my experience by being of service to others. I looked about at the magnificence, feeling the vastness of it all, the love, serenity, and oneness of it all. At 9:26 a.m., my pulse returned. My doctor, who had recently returned from his honeymoon, was the first to respond to the code blue. He had just arrived at his workplace, which was located in the same building as the hospital. He was going through his mail when he was informed that he was needed in labor and delivery. "All right, I'll be right there." He then told me that the individual told him, "No, they need you right now." He sprinted through the breezeway between his office and the hospital, dropping his mail. He entered the delivery room and was astounded by what he saw. There was nothing in my medical history or during my pregnancy that indicated I was at risk for delivery problems. Yet there I was, dead on the table with my kid still inside of me. He informed my husband and me that the following few minutes would be a flurry of efforts made to deliver our baby as soon as possible. Chest compressions were halted, and my baby was delivered after a fast incision. I lost a substantial amount of blood and continued to bleed for hours thereafter. So much so that I needed a transfusion. The code was attended to by a cardiologist who happened to be in the hospital seeing patients that morning. He later told me that this was not his typical pattern, and that normally, by 9:30 a.m. on a Monday, he was in his office seeing patients. A cardiothoracic surgeon and another obstetrician were also present and came to my help. These were the people who, in a seeming random sequence of circumstances, saved my life and the life of my daughter. Following this incident, I was in a drug-induced coma for 3 days in the intensive care unit. I developed DIC, or disseminated intravascular coagulation, a potentially fatal consequence of AFE, amniotic fluid embolism, in which there is uncontrollable bleeding. I was transfused and the bleeding gradually stopped. AFE and DIC both have an extremely high death rate. After that, I was removed from the ventilator and placed in a private room. My daughter had been transferred to another hospital with the NICU, neonatal intensive care unit, and she had been brought in to see me. I felt like I'd met her before, but I couldn't remember. I was discharged on day 6 and was still very tired. I suffered severe memory loss. I was not afraid of anything. Before my NDE, I was a type A personality, worried and driven, and suddenly, I was someone completely different. It was incredible to feel this way. For the first time in my life, I felt liberated. About 3 weeks following the occurrence, I had a dream in which I recalled my NDE. It was more vibrant than real-life 3D. I tried to explain how big it was to everyone around me, but they didn't seem to understand. I contacted Dr. Jeffrey Long online, and he responded via email. I told him I remembered my NDE, but that there was still something I couldn't place. He advised me to pay close attention to my dreams. I hadn't specified in the email that this was how I remembered my NDE. I spent the months after that caring for my baby, and after 3 months, I had to begin my new career as a physician assistant. I was still having memory problems, and have since, so I worked extremely hard to relearn everything. I was quite familiar with small nuances, including my medical training, but not now. At the same time, all I wanted to do was be with my daughter. Throughout the months and years following her birth, I fought between believing and not believing what had happened to me. It felt like there was an internal war going on all the time. Although I had changed, everyone else expected me to remain the same. Just to get by each day, I strove to meet these expectations. I've changed my medical specializations 8 times in the 13 years after my NDE. I can do that as a PA, but I've never been able to find employment that I thought I should be doing. When I knew I'd helped someone, I felt the most fulfilled. I denied myself the beauty of my NDE and the information it provided. In a nutshell, we were all here to love and to express that love in whatever we do. I didn't believe I was capable of being that way, so I buried myself in experience, becoming dissatisfied, sad, and unfulfilled as a result. Over the last 3 years, I've done a lot of inner work, and I've arrived at a point where I'm not afraid to be myself, who's a loving person who expresses this love in the world. My life's mission is to do this while also inspiring others to live from their true nature.